My name is Roz, and I'm 29 years old. On the morning of my son's christening, I stood in front of the mirror in the small room behind the sanctuary, gently smoothing the lace collar on his tiny white gown. For one peaceful moment, I let myself believe the day was gonna be simple. Just family, faith, and the name we'd chosen with so much love and care. My husband, Weston, stood behind me, straightening his tie. He caught my eyes in the mirror and flashed that warm smile he always gave me whenever he could tell I was kinda nervous. He had no clue what was about to go down. Honestly, neither did I. We had named our son Theodore after Weston's grandfather, the man who stepped up and raised him when nobody else would. It felt right. It felt like our choice. My mother, Ingrid, had other ideas, though she never had the guts to say them directly to my face. She'd casually mentioned once that she preferred the name Julian, saying it sounded more distinguished, more suitable for a boy who would carry the family name into the future. I smiled politely and told her we'd already made our decision. I honestly figured that was the end of it. By the time we walked into the church, every pew was filled. Rows of relatives and close friends wore soft-colored outfits, while the baptismal font shimmered beneath the colorful light pouring through the stained glass windows. Father Dominic stood waiting at the altar, hands folded, ready for us to bring Theodore forward. I still remember the quiet hum of conversations, the gentle scent of candle wax, and the sunlight scattering bright patches of color across the old stone floor. It should have been absolutely perfect. Then my mother stood up. She didn't wait for an invitation. She walked straight to the small podium near the pews, where guests sometimes read blessings, and grabbed the microphone meant for the deacon's announcements before the service even began. The second she opened her mouth, my stomach dropped. I recognized that look instantly. It was the same look she always wore whenever she'd already made up her mind and planned to make everyone else fall in line, whether they liked it or not. "We're using the name we picked. Yours is ridiculous." She said it loud enough for the entire church to turn and stare. Right there at my son's baptism, in front of the priest, in front of Weston's family, and in front of people I'd known my whole life, my mother boldly announced that Theodore would be called Julian instead. She spoke as if the decision had already been made, like Weston and I were nothing more than guests at an event she'd organized herself. My face burned with embarrassment. Weston's hand tightened around mine. But she wasn't even close to being done. Before I could even step forward to say a single word, she motioned toward my aunt, who was holding a wicker basket lined with soft blue cloth, and started handing out small wrapped gifts to the people sitting in the front pews. Each gift had been monogrammed with her chosen name, every one stitched with the letter J, as though the whole thing had never even been up for discussion. I watched people's expressions shift from confusion to those awkward, polite smiles folks wear when they honestly have no clue how to react. She'd already gone around telling half the church that the baby would be called Julian from that day forward. Several relatives nodded along because they'd heard the name from her days earlier, long before Weston, and I had even walked through those doors. My hands were shaking. Not from fear. From something far sharper. This wasn't just about a name anymore. It was about my mother deciding, yet again, that my life was hers to control and rearrange however she saw fit. I looked over at Weston. He looked back at me. And in that one silent glance, something settled deep inside my chest. Steady. Certain. I stepped toward the front of the church, walking past the stunned faces, past my mother, who was still clutching the microphone with that smug little smile on her face. Then I turned to Father Dominic. "Father," I said calmly, "I'd like to stop the ceremony for just a moment." The entire church fell dead silent. Even the organist froze, fingers hovering above the keys. My mother looked at me, her confident expression cracking into pure disbelief, like it had never once crossed her mind that I might actually stand up to her instead of just going along with her little plan. Father Dominic glanced back and forth between us, unsure whether he should continue, his hand still resting near the holy water. I took a slow breath, feeling every pair of eyes in that sanctuary settle on me. I could feel my son's tiny weight against my chest. His little fingers were wrapped around the edge of my sleeve, completely unaware of the drama unfolding around him. I'd never planned to make a scene. Honestly, all I wanted was a quiet, meaningful morning for my little boy. But sometimes life has other plans. Sometimes the moment chooses you. And this was definitely one of those moments. This baptism, I said, my voice steadier than I ever expected it to be, is going to happen exactly the way my husband and I planned it. My mother opened her mouth, clearly ready to argue. But I wasn't finished. Not even close. And what I was about to say would change everything between us. You don't get to rename my son in front of everyone and call it a gift, I said loudly enough for every person in that church to hear. His name is Theodore. It was Theodore before you walked in here today. And it'll still be Theodore when we walk back out. A ripple swept through the pews as quiet whispers traveled from row to row. I watched my aunt slowly lower the basket of monogrammed gifts onto the nearest pew, like she suddenly didn't want any part of holding them anymore. My mother's face cycled through several emotions in just a few seconds. Shock. Embarrassment. Then finally, something colder. Something defensive. I was only trying to help, she said, her voice tight as she tried to smooth things over now that dozens of eyes were fixed on her instead of me. Julian is a beautiful name. I figured you'd come around once you heard everyone saying it out loud. That was the part that hit me the hardest. Right there, in front of the entire congregation, she admitted she'd planned every bit of this. She'd ordered the gifts. She'd told the relatives. She'd set up the announcement because she honestly believed that putting me on the spot in front of everyone would pressure me into giving in. I looked down at Theodore, who had started fussing softly against my shoulder, completely unaware that the grown-ups around him were actually arguing over his own name. Weston stepped beside me and rested a steady hand on my back before speaking in a calm but unwavering voice. "Ingrid, we love you," he said, "but this isn't your decision to make." It never was. There wasn't an ounce of anger in his voice. Just quiet certainty. And somehow, that landed even harder than if he'd yelled. Father Dominic, who had patiently stood through the entire exchange, finally spoke. "Perhaps," he said gently, "we should allow the parents to make this choice, just as it has always been meant to be." A few people nodded. Then a few more. I could actually feel the room shifting. The sympathy that had been uncertain only moments earlier was now quietly settling in our direction. Realizing the tide was turning against her, my mother tried one last time. "I only wanted him to have a strong name," she said, her voice much softer now, almost pleading. "A name that truly means something." "Theodore means gift of God," I answered without hesitation. "I don't need anyone telling me what a strong name sounds like. I chose his name the same way I chose to become his mother. With everything I have." Even I was surprised by the words as they left my mouth. But I meant every single one of them. By then, I wasn't just standing up for a name anymore. I was standing up for my right to raise my own child without my mother trying to rewrite our family story before it had even begun. And there was no way I was backing down. My mother stood there for what felt like forever, the microphone still hanging loosely in her hand. Then, without saying another word, she slowly placed it on the small table beside the podium. She didn't apologize. Not really. Not in the way I'd once hoped she might. But she stepped away from the front of the church and quietly returned to her pew. The confidence she'd walked in with had completely faded. My aunt silently gathered the monogrammed gifts back into the basket and slid it beneath the pew, out of sight, like maybe the whole awkward mess could just disappear if nobody looked at it. Father Dominic turned toward Weston and me, patiently waiting for a signal. I looked at my husband. He gave me a small nod. I nodded back. Together, we stepped toward the baptismal font. This time, no one interrupted us. Father Dominic gently poured the holy water over Theodore's tiny head, and his words echoed clearly through the church. "Theodore, I baptize you in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit." Theodore let out a tiny cry, more surprised than upset, and a soft wave of relieved laughter drifted through the congregation, finally breaking the tension that had filled the room only moments before. After the ceremony, guests slowly came over to congratulate us. Several quietly apologized for going along with my mother's announcement earlier, admitting they honestly hadn't known what else to do in the moment. I simply smiled. "There isn't anything for you to apologize for," I told them. The only person who owes anyone an explanation is the one who tried to make a decision that was never hers to make. My mother left not long after the ceremony ended. She didn't stay for pictures. She skipped the small reception afterward. She simply walked away. Part of me still ached over the distance that now stood between us. But a much bigger part of me felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. I'd protected my son's name. But even more than that, I'd protected something far more important. The simple truth that some choices belong only to the people who are responsible for making them. As Weston gently squeezed my hand, we walked out of the church together into the warm afternoon sunlight. Theodore rested peacefully against my chest, calm at last and already drifting off to sleep. Whatever came next with my mother, whatever difficult conversations still waited for us, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I would never let anyone else write my family's story for me. Not that day. Not ever again. And if this story touched your heart, if you believe every mother and father deserve the final say when it comes to their own child's name and future, be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next unforgettable story.